borrowing, and the result of 30 years ministering for Jesus. I want to lay aside the mantle of preaching this morning, and I want to pick up the gift that God gave me, the gift of teaching. I want to teach this morning. But to do it, I want to start by asking a very personal question. Are you fed up of the situation you're in? Now, if you'd asked me earlier this morning, do you feel as though you're being confined, that you don't have total freedom? It may be a prison without walls and without bars, but it still feels like prison. Your prison may be because of your situation, illness, frustration, even hard work can result in confining you. Perhaps you've been waiting for deliverance from your confinement. You may even feel as though your deliverance is your right. Now, it may not be any comfort to you, but I would share that you're in very good company. There are many who feel just as you do. Even with this small gathering this morning, there are some who feel the same way as you, totally frustrated. Now, if you want to be with me this morning, turn to Acts 24. I've just got one verse, verse 27. Acts 24, verse 27. When 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus. But because Felix wanted to grant a favor to the Jews, he left Paul in prison. So that's my text for this morning. I said earlier, I wish they'd have names like Smith and Brown. It would make life that much easier, wouldn't it? Okay, let me give you some background on this text. The Jews had put a price on Paul's head. They were convinced that he was now out to destroy all that Judaism stood for. Paul had been arrested in Jerusalem. However, he had slipped through the fingers of the Jews, and he was now under armed guard, and he was taken to Caesarea. But the Jews hadn't given up, and they were determined to get Paul. Nothing happened for 2 years. Felix, who was governor, having heard the case against Paul, which was presented by Tertullus, who had come down especially from Jerusalem, then he listened to Paul's defense, and Felix did nothing. Now let me stop for a moment. Have you ever got uptight because someone has done nothing? Especially when the person has got the power and the authority to do something, that they do nothing. So you can imagine how Paul felt. Paul was a man on a mission. He had places to visit, churches to establish, gospels to preach, but for 2 years he was confined. And the picture I get of Paul is that he was a man full of energy, raring to go. He had to be doing something. Okay, it wasn't a strict imprisonment. He was under guard, but he could have visitors. Now the question I posed to myself, and I'm posing to you this morning, what did Paul occupy himself with for 2 years? Do you think he wore himself out by ranting and raging against the injustice he had received? You see, how many of us are angry at the way we've been treated? Some get to the point of inner collapse because of the way that they've been treated. Some spend their whole life being bitter at the way they had been treated. I was actually talking to a young man yesterday, full of bitterness about the way he's been treated. And the question which is on their lips is, why me? Imagine Paul, one who'd been used. He'd used to being out and about. He was used to being on the road and the sea. Now he's confined to a house. And let me also point out the company he had within the house, to put it mildly, wasn't good. We're told that Felix the governor conversed with Paul. Now, I don't know if you're aware that Felix was not a nice person. According to Tacitus, Felix exercised the power of a king with the mind of a slave. He was always on the make, trying to make something for himself. And he probably deliberately kept Paul in prison, hoping that someone would bribe him to let him go. In addition to that, he was a womanizer. Drusilla, his Jewish wife at the time, was his third wife. And incidentally, in passing, they had a child called Agrippa, who was one of the victims when Mount Vesuvius erupted in AD 79. As you're having a conversation with this man, it must have been very difficult. Felix wanted to talk religion, but as soon as it appeared to have some personal reference to his life, he broke it off. Now, where have I heard that before? Listen, it's bad enough being shut away in confinement, but with that type of company for 2 years? Church, sometime or other, we all have to face the question of restriction. It can come in many ways. Illness can prevent us from doing all the activities which others take for granted. And that doesn't just apply to physical illness. It can be the same with emotional illness as well. There are others who find that their education is limited. And suddenly they discover how bright others are, or they then realize how dull they are. You know, I've known brilliant people who had numerous degrees from university, but they had to take a labourer's job so that their families could live. When I was in the fire service, I was a training officer, and part of my job was interviewing would-be recruits. And you'd be amazed at the number of young men who wanted to come in and just be a fireman. And then when you ask for their qualifications, oh, I got a BSc, I got this, and I got that. And I used to sit down with me with nothing, but never mind. The qualifications, they just wanted to be a fireman. Equally, to look after others can also have the same effect. It can confine us. Of course, advancing age begins to restrict us. Now, my knowledge of Paul is that he would have faced up to this confinement, this frustration, but he would have done it in a positive manner. He would have thanked God for his survival and for his life, and that he still had all his faculties. He may, at the beginning of his confinement, even enjoyed the rest. After all the travelling he had done, he would have been able to build his strength back up. But one thing for sure, he would have spent his time in prayer, regular prayer. And he would have caught up with his companions like Luke, and he would have been gathering information. Friends, when restriction comes, and that we're unable to do all that we desire, whatever the reason, there are three things that we can undertake. And the first one is, we can consciously face the situation. Many refuse to acknowledge or face up to where they are. We've got to face up to reality. Some mentally deny their situation. Each of us must come to that place where we're able to say, here I am, and here for the present I must be. Until we face the situation, we will go no further. Let me give an example. And this is true. A man was diagnosed as having bowel cancer. All the tests confirmed it. But he flatly refused to accept the diagnosis. He blanked it out of his mind. Sadly, he just got worse and worse until eventually it was too late. We need to face up to reality. Secondly, we must accept the facts as they are, positively and without resentment. We must not allow bitterness to enter. Bitterness is an inward anger, and often the anger has to be expressed. Let me tell you a story. One morning, Genghis Khan, the great king and warrior, rode out into the woods to have a day's sport. And many of his friends were with him, and they rode out gaily, carrying their bows and their arrows, and behind them came the servants with the dogs. It was a merry hunting party, and the woods rang with the shouts of laughter. They expected to carry much game home in the evening. On the king's wrist sat his favourite hawk. For those days, hawks were trained to hunt. At a word from their masters, they would fly high up into the air and look around for the prey. If they chanced to see a deer or a rabbit, they would swoop down upon it like an arrow. All day long, Genghis Khan and his huntsmen rode through the woods, but they didn't find as much game as they expected. And towards evening, they started for home. Now, the king had often ridden through these woods, and he knew all the paths. So while the rest of the party took the quickest way, he decided to go the longer road through a valley between two mountains. The day had been warm. The king was very thirsty. His pet hawk on his left wrist had flown away. It was sure to find its way home. And the king rode along slowly. He had once seen a spring of clear water near this pathway, if he could only find it now. But that hot day of summer had dried up all the mountain brooks. At last, to his joy, he saw some water trickling down over the edge of a rock. He knew that there was a spring further up. In the wet season, a swift stream of water always poured down there, but now it came only one drop at a time. The king leapt off his horse. He took a little silver cup from his hunting bag, and he held it to catch the slowly falling drops of water. It took a long time to fill the cup, and the king was so thirsty that he could hardly wait. At last it was nearly full. He put the cup to his lips and was about to drink. And all at once there was this whirring sound in the air, and the cup was knocked from his hand. The water was spilled all over the ground, and the king looked up to see who had done it, and it was his pet hawk. The hawk flew back and forth a few times, and then went and settled on the rocks. The king picked up the cup, and again started to catch the water. This time, he didn't have to wait so long. When the cup was half full, he lifted it towards his mouth, but before it touched his lips, the hawk swooped in again and knocked it from his hands. Now the king began to get angry. He tried again, and for the third time, the hawk stopped him from drinking. The king was indeed very angry. "How do you dare act so?" he shouted at the hawk. "If I had you in my hands, I would wring your neck." Then he filled his cup again, but before he tried to drink, he drew his sword. "No, Sir Hawk," he said, "this is the last time." And he'd hardly spoken before the hawk swooped down and knocked the cup out of his hand. But the king was waiting, and with a quick sweep of the sword, he struck the bird. And the next moment the poor hawk lay bleeding and dying at his master's feet. "And that's what you get for your pains," said Genghis Khan. But when he looked for his cup, he found that it had fallen between two rocks, where he couldn't reach it. "At any rate, I will have a drink from that spring," he said to him. And with that he began to climb up the steep bank to the place from which the water trickled. It was hard work. And the higher he climbed, the thirstier he became. At last he reached a place. There indeed was a pool of water. But what was that lying in the pool, almost filling it? It was a huge, dead snake of the most poisonous kind. And the king stopped and forgot his thirst. He thought only of the poor dead bird lying on the ground below. "The hawk saved my life, and how did I repay him? He was my best friend, and I have killed him." And he clambered down the bank and took the bird up gently, put it in his hunting bag. Then he got on his horse and he rode home. And this is what he said to himself: "I've learned a sad lesson today, and that is this: never do anything in anger. Never do anything in anger." Then thirdly, we need to ask ourselves, in this situation that we're in, how can I turn this experience into good? How can I add this form of acceptance rather than just succumb into fate? Church, it's reacting positively to what is happening to us that we extract the profit from what, first of all, appears to be barren. And that's how I believe Paul acted towards his confinement. Okay. Can we also consider that Paul spent his life ministering to people? Now, he had to be ministered to. And so often, all we want to do is to give. Particularly if you've got a personality like Paul. And some strong people find the experience of accepting assistance very hard. Grace is always needed to receive charity. Another story: during the late 1800s, an English evangelist named Henry Morehouse, might have heard of him, made several trips to go and preach in America. On one of the occasions, he was taking a walk through a poor section of the town when he noticed a small boy coming out of a store with a pitcher of milk in his hand. And just then, he slipped and fell, breaking the pitcher, spilling the milk all over the sidewalk. Morehouse rushed to the child and found him unhurt but terrified. "My mama will whip me," he kept crying. So Morehouse picked up the boy and carried him into the nearby store where the preacher purchased a new pitcher. Then he returned to the dairy and he had the pitcher washed and filled with milk. And with that done, he carried the boy and the pitcher home. Putting the youngster down on the front porch, Morehouse handed him the pitcher and asked, "Will your mama whip you now?" And a wide smile came across the boy's tear-stained face. "No, sir, because this is a lot better pitcher than we had before." You see, there's a lesson there for you and I. In grace, God saves us. But this is the lesson. He doesn't just patch up our old lives that have been shattered by sin and Satan. That wouldn't do for God. His reputation is at stake. We are his workmanship. And whatever God does, it's going to be the best. And then, of course, we've got the old enemy which arises personal pride. And don't any of you come to me and say you haven't got pride. Humility does not come without effort. And there's normally a price to pay with humility. Another story, I'm full of stories this morning. You might have heard of this gentleman, the African Bishop Desmond Tutu, was once asked why he became an Anglican rather than joining some other denomination. And he replied that back in the old days of apartheid, when a black person and a white person met while walking on a footpath, the black person was expected to step into the gutter to allow the white person to pass, and then nod their head as a gesture of respect. One day, Tutu says, when I was a little boy, my mother and I were walking down the street when a tall white man dressed in a black suit came towards us. And before my mother and I could step off the sidewalk, as was expected of us, this man stepped off the sidewalk, and as my mother and I passed, he tipped his hat in a gesture of respect to her. I was more than surprised at what had happened, so I asked my mother, why did the white man do that? And my mother explained, he's an Anglican priest. He's a man of God, that's why he did it. And when she told me that he was an Anglican priest, I decided there and then I wanted to be an Anglican priest. And what's more, I wanted to be a man of God. You see, that Anglican priest was willing to give up his rights so that humility could reign. There's a lesson for one or two of you this morning. Give up your rights so that humility can reign. Do you know I believe Paul grew spiritually while he was locked up? Do you know that? He learned an awful lot of spiritual lessons. The big one, he had to learn to depend on others. I'll share personally with you that I know many ministers who find it difficult to sit in a service and just receive. They've got to be involved. They've got to be active. I know some opt out because they couldn't be involved. See, a great truth is that Christian experience is all rooted in receiving. Did you know that? It's all about receiving. Think about it. How did you get your salvation?
Receive it.
You received it. There's no wholeness unless you're willing to receive. The Christian life begins by receiving, and it continues all the way by receiving, receiving, receiving. What an encouragement for those who came to see Paul, and he accepted what they offered. We know that Felix left Paul in prison. Paul accepted the situation, and he used it, and he had his friends use it. So I say to you this morning, church, every setback should be viewed in faith, because it's faith that will transform the restrictions. Whatever restriction you're going through this morning, give it to God in faith, and he'll make something of it. Rather than sit there moaning, groaning, lashing out, accept it and let God use it. So if you're frustrated, you're feeling imprisoned, confined, then approach it as Paul did, in faith, and you will still be used by the Lord. One of the greatest witnesses will be the manner in which we deal and cope with disappointments. Now, I don't want to be Job's comforter, but I must tell you, every one of us is going to have a disappointment and a hardship, because they will certainly come. Being a Christian will not stop these worldly experiences. Paul was one of the great men of faith, but he still had to endure these hardships. No, I said this on Thursday. I know that many television evangelists promise that if you accept Jesus, then your life is going to be easy. That's not how it is, actually. But the wonderful news is, we will have Christ with us. I learned many years ago that how we walk on the mountaintops does not benefit as much as how we walk in the valleys. It will be the walk in the valley that we grow. There we learn endurance and wisdom. Not on the mountaintop. We're too busy just dancing around up there. It's down there in the valley where we learn wisdom and endurance. Quite a while ago, a minister taught me that as we come up out of the valley of despair, use the opportunity to bring someone else with you. Now there's an invitation for you, isn't it? I assure you, the valley is the place to witness, not the mountaintop. And I also assure you, the valley is the place to grow and mature spiritually. We're all going to go through these times where we're restricted or confined. It may only be a week, or it could be years. I remember Barbara and I had 7 years of being confined, didn't we? But I learned something in that. I learned to serve. I learned to be humble. I learned an awful lot of things. And patience. Oh yes, that was something that was very lacking, but I learned. So God, if you give it to God, God can use it, He'll change it and bring it into being. Hallelujah. Bless you.